1-minute warning, ladies and gentlemen.
Tisdale.
Good evening. Welcome to the Operations and Customer Service Committee meeting. We will now come to order. We are convened as of 5:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask that everyone attending the meeting please mute yourself until you are recognized to speak. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Please note that the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held during Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. Meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as possible on the board's website. You can visit rtd-denver.com and scroll to the bottom of the page for the link to the Board of Directors page. Directors and members of the staff, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I ask that you please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on your phone, if necessary, press *6. I will also note that we may all want to mute our cell phones, which are sitting on the desks next to us. We will not be taking public commentary during this meeting. Members of the public who are interested in speaking directly to the board are encouraged to do so during the upcoming board meeting. For future meeting dates, please go to the board's meeting portal, which is located at rtd.iqm2.com. At RTD, safety is one of our core values. We will begin this meeting with a short safety briefing. While recent public health orders have relaxed requirements for the use of face coverings in certain settings, please don't let your guard down too soon. The Transit Security Administration, AKA the TSA, has extended the federal mask requirement for public transportation until September 13th, 2021. The federal mask requirement states that individuals must wear a face covering while waiting for and while riding public transportation, to include airports and aircraft, train stations, trains, bus stops, and buses. RTD requires that employees and customers continue to wear face coverings. RTD is taking a cautious approach to returning to pre-pandemic operating practices to ensure the safety of our employees and our customers. Transit does continue to be an extremely safe way to travel, and there have been no clusters of positive cases linked to transit in the Denver metro area. Please consider getting vaccinated if you have not done so already. You could win $1 million. Wear your face covering in settings where one is required. Practice reasonable physical distancing, and hopefully we will end this pandemic sooner rather than later. Thank you all. At this time, I will ask that Mr. McKay call the roll for the record.
Director Bouquet,
Present.
Director Broom,
Present.
Director Busick,
Here.
Director Catlin,
Here.
Director Cook,
Here.
Director Davidson,
Here.
Director Deschel,
Here.
Director Geisinger,
I'm here.
Director Lewis,
Present.
Director Rosenthal,
Present.
Director Sloan,
Here.
Director Tisdale,
Present.
Director Whitmore,
Present.
Director Williams,
I am here.
Chair Rivera Malpietti.
Here.
That's 15 present, 0 absent.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Appreciate that from you. So we don't have to wait for anybody else. We have one recommended action on the agenda this evening. And that action is for the Board of Directors to authorize the General Manager and CEO or her designee to execute all documents necessary to enter into a contract with Metro Taxi, Inc. in order to continue providing a subsidy for the Access-a-Cab program from July 1 through December 31st, 2021, at an amount not to exceed $705,000. Do I have a motion?
Busick, so moved.
Tisdale, second.
Thank you, gentlemen. At this time, I'm going to ask the staff to present any pertinent information regarding the action. Let us note that the action was included in the packet and directors have had time to ask questions of the staff offline. Please raise your virtual hand and wait to be recognized to speak, and state your name for the record each time that you do speak. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Michael Ford, COO, and I'd like to provide a little background. In March of 1997, the Regional Transportation District introduced the Access-a-Cab program to the Access-a-Ride customers. The program offered flexibility in transportation services for individuals with disabilities. Customers scheduled same-day trips with Metro Transportation. The programs are interchangeable for certified eligible customers. The Access-a-Cab program, the service provided is not branded RTD service, but rather taxi trips subsidized by RTD. The current subsidy is $12 per trip. The Access-a-Cab program is popular, providing 18% of all trips to paratransit customers, expanding on the lessons learned from the ongoing Uber pilot will provide RTD time to develop a more robust model and a request for proposals that will allow for non-emergency medical transportation, taxi and transportation network companies to offer expanded customer options when selecting an on-demand service alternative. So more options and more competition. Part of the discussion, the Access-a-Cab program is beneficial to RTD due to smaller subsidy per ride when compared to trips taken on RTD operated Access-a-Ride services. Trips taken by customers on Access-a-Ride service cost RTD an average of $60 per trip as opposed to $12. During the third and fourth quarter of 2021, the Access-a-Cab is expected to provide approximately 58,750 cab trips at a total cost of $705,000. If those same trips were provided by the Access-a-Ride, we would be looking at approximately $3,525,000. So again, we're asking for authorization to move forward for a recommendation to extend the excessive cab program from July to December of this year, giving us time to put out a more robust RFP and to improve the options that our customers will surely benefit from. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I see Director Broom with the first question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I had was, are any of those cab trips for people with wheelchairs?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Ford, please.
Yeah, I believe that they are able to use them, but I will defer to Paul to give a little bit more specifics on that. Paul Hamilton?
Yes, this is Paul Hamilton, Senior Manager of Paratransit Services. The current service provider, Metro Taxi, does have a wheelchair accessible fleet. That said, they aren't quite what they should be in terms of what we really need for the demand that we have. That is, about 25% of all of our trips are trips for passengers that use wheelchairs. So we can do more, and we are working, as Michael Ford had stated earlier, to do more as we develop an RFP that will give us more robust options, not only for our ambulatory passengers, but for wheelchair passengers. But in short answer to your question, yes, they do have wheelchair accessible vehicles.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Broom. Director Deschel, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This is actually a question for you, which is, to me, when I heard you say, well, I got the packet and had an opportunity to ask staff questions, that's true, and I do ask staff questions, but I sort of view these meetings as the public's opportunity to see how we all deliberate, and often intentionally actually ask questions in the public, because otherwise, to me, it sort of defeats the purpose of a public meeting. Was that sort of, I'm just trying to seek clarity on the intent of your making that statement prior to our discussion.
I don't have a problem with anyone who answers or asks a question in this forum. I was just noting that there may be some directors who do not ask questions because they had already had their questions answered. Often they are simple questions that have to do perhaps with a percentage of rides, or like, do they have wheelchair vehicles? So if you want to ask it here, that is absolutely your right to do so. If you wanted to call Mr. Ford up before the meeting, you've had the packet since last Thursday, and you could also have done that, which is why I have chosen to make that comment.
Got it. Thank you. And now I have a substantive question.
Nope, you're done. That's it. Go ahead.
Which is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, accessorized services are provided to those individuals who cannot adequately or easily use our fixed route services. And as I also understand it, all of our buses are accessible and are wheelchair accessible vehicles. And so where is the disconnect, and where is that disconnect? If we need a wheelchair taxi and the buses are all wheelchair accessible, where I feel like I'm missing a piece of context, because in my mind, at least, if everything's supposed to be fully accessible, then Access-a-Ride wouldn't, for wheelchair purposes, necessarily be needed. Is it that our bus stops are inadequate? What is sort of missing there?
Mr. Ford or Mr. Hamilton, who would like that? I can speak to it, but I'll let one of the staff go first.
If I may speak to it, Madam
Absolutely.
Chair, Director Deschel, we have to keep in mind that there's also cognitive disabilities as well, not just physical disabilities. So we actually incorporate that in as well as we go forward with that. So I wanted to stress that that is an important aspect to take into consideration, but I will yield the floor to Mr. Hamilton should he need to elaborate more.
Sure. This is Senior Manager Paul Hamilton, Senior Manager of Paratransit Services. Yeah, if I could expand on that question, I think one of the larger points here is that our paratransit services in and of themselves are not actually all accessible, but they are dispatched by software that allows us to provide the right vehicle for the right trip. We have 4 service providers right now that provide accessorized transportation, and one of those providers is referred to as Transdev non-dedicated. To my knowledge, none of their vehicles are actually accessible. They're ambulatory taxis and NEMT vehicles. But again, there's not really an issue there in terms of using ambulatory fleet as part of your overall mix of vehicles to supply paratransit services, so long as you have software that knows which vehicle to send for which customer at a given time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think this is great. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton and Director Deschel. I see a number of hands up. I'm going to go to, I'll just pick. I'm going to go to Chair Rivera Malpiedi first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Hamilton, if you could, just for the community that's listening in, do the definition of ambulatory, I would appreciate that first.
Sure, I know we all get caught up in our nomenclature. Ambulatory is somebody that would use a mobility device, but for instance, could still ambulate or walk to and from the vehicle to board. So for instance, somebody who uses a cane or a fold-up walker would be still considered ambulatory. Even someone who uses a portable wheelchair and that wheelchair folds up would still be considered a transfer customer or ambulatory. It is only those customers who use a wheelchair full-time who could not actually either transfer or walk with another mobility device that would not be considered ambulatory.
Thank you, sir. And then my follow-up question, if I might, Madam Chair, would be out of the amount of money that you're asking for, how many folks do you anticipate utilizing that service in the ADA community?
As a percentage of our ridership, I can tell you, I believe Michael Ford might have given the numbers, but it is rather substantial. About 18% of all the trips that we provide to our community that uses our paratransit service, 18% actually use the Access-a-Cab program as an alternative.
Thank you so very much. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rivera Malpiedi. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you all hear me? I had trouble with this device the other day.
We hear you just fine.
I wanted to thank Deborah Johnson for mentioning some of our cognitively challenged customers. I've had a number of my constituents who have had such issues, and the fact that they might need to transfer makes it a little bit more of a complex trip for them if they have more than a one-seat ride, and that some of these features are really important for them to access some of the services they need. So I really appreciate that. Mr. Hamilton, you mentioned that you're going to extend this through the end of the year so that you get more interest or competition. Am I hearing that correctly? So we currently have 4 providers, and no.
We actually only have one provider that's part of the Access-a-Cab program right now.
Have you heard of others who are interested in it, though?
We have had in the past. We don't actually have an RFP on the street yet, so it would be hard to gauge what the interest might be.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you. That's all I have.
Director Catlin, if I can provide some clarity. So when I first learned about our contract, I requested of staff to do a solicitation to see if we can broaden our bandwidth as relates to having viable options, recognizing Mr. Hamilton did specify that we do have vehicles that we're utilizing through Access-a-Cab, and maybe not all of them are accessible in reference to carrying a mobility device. I wanted to ensure that we're leveling our playing field and looking at best practices in the industry as we look to ensure that we're providing our customers that may have disabilities with viable options as opposed to putting all of our eggs in one basket. So I just wanted to clarify that was the intent behind doing a solicitation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. I like that answer.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Director Broom, your hand is up, but I think it's still up from before. So I will go to Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kind of building on a little bit of Director Catlin and Director Rivera Malpiedi, and that is the amount that we could expand in the future. Is there more demand out there that is unsatisfied? And, you know, to the extent that we could actually, you know, perhaps promote the Access a Cab program more to retirement communities, to individuals who are living, you know, perhaps alone or just, you know, we need to do more outreach to them. What is the sense of the possible growth in the program?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Paul.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Thank you. The only point that I was going to make here is that we absolutely can always do outreach and advertise and should do so when a program or service is available to our customers. But our customer base that is part of the Access a Cab program are always limited to those customers that are part of our Access a Ride program. So if they have not already qualified to be a paratransit Access a Ride customer, they wouldn't automatically qualify for the Access a Cab program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Director Broom, do you have a question, sir?
I do, Madam Chair. What happens when you have a major snowstorm? Does the cab company refuse to take RTD business?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Hamilton?
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Paul.
Sorry. I know historically we have always seen a downturn in available cabs, and it's not necessarily that they're not wanting to take our business. A lot of these drivers who drive cabs are owner operators, and they're simply not willing to take the risk to put their property out on the street during a bad snowstorm. So yeah, there's definitely a drop in the availability of cabs, not only the Access a Cab program, but from our non-dedicated service provider, TransDev, when we do have bad weather like that.
Or do people make reservations the day ahead and then they don't show up? And how's that handled?
They can make, yes, I'm sorry, they can make reservations a day in advance, but one of the upsides, in addition to the fact that it costs RTD less to provide those services, is it's an on-demand service. They can take those trips and call in the day of for service. So practically speaking, most of our trip demand comes from people calling the day that they want a trip.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Broom. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I don't see any other hands up. I want to note for the record that Director Claudia Folska was a regular user of Access a Cab, and were she still part of this group, could probably answer some of these questions herself. Okay, seeing no more, I will ask for a vote, and I believe we're doing this the easy way these days. Is there anyone who wants to vote against this? Okay, hearing no one, I will assume that we have 15 yes votes, no votes, and no abstentions. So the motion passes. The mover was Director Buzek, and the second was Director Tisdale. And we will move on through the agenda at this point. That was our only action item. So I'm going to go now to discussion items, and we do have one discussion item this evening. And I'm going to hand the microphone to Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Michael Ford, COO. And I'm going to just go through the background and discussion around the August-September service change. And then we also have a presentation that we would like to provide to you as well. But I just like to cover a few finer points here. In your packet, States commensurate with the service change and voting process detailed in the collective bargaining agreement shared between the RTD and ATU 1001. The September service change proposal facilitates both an opportunity for RTD bus and rail operators to vote new work assignments and the opportunity for service development staff to make adjustments to the operations plan for RTD's transit network. A vital part of the development of the service plan involves stakeholder and customer engagement process. The stakeholder listening phase took place in April and in May, and the public meetings phase will begin in late June. Both stakeholder feedback and customer input will help inform RTD's future service plans. And as part of the discussion with the public health restrictions on building capacities and public gathering lifting, there has been an increase in requests for return to pre-pandemic service levels. Though current ridership levels indicate modest increases, the anticipated return to school and workplace plan for September 2021 timeframe supports the need for increased commuter service. The proposal herein contains a mix of service enhancements and service adjustments that address commuter/school service patterns and contract compliance, leveraging the resources previously dedicated to supporting social distancing. The proposed service change further modifies the initial COVID service plan implemented in April 19th, 2020, and modified in January and in June of 2021. The route service contained in this proposal are a mix of formerly suspended commuter routes with educational institutions as a major ridership generator. The projected school attendance and the number of requests received for additional commuter service align this proposal with RTD's service guidelines. And those happen to be service performance evaluations based on RTD service standards, the effects on the overall integrity of the transit network and the transit-dependent markets, the availability of alternative services to affect riders, cost-effective distributions throughout the district and family of services, and the ability to enhance service when possible. Title VI and Civil Rights Act benefits and services are provided without regard to race, color, or national origin. Also, disparate effects on low income and minority populations and response to changes in communities where services are provided. And then just given the current economic conditions due to COVID-induced economic slowdown, the guidance for the proposed September 2021 service change are incorporated in the board adopted guidance for COVID-19 budget reduction. And we're really focused on principle number 3. We will provide or prioritize mobility for people who must depend on transit during the pandemic. We will strive to maximize mobility during the pandemic for those customers who most depend upon our service to access essential jobs and their necessities, while also keeping our community activity centers appropriately connected. I just wanted to give some of that background before we go into the presentation. We'll probably hit a few points in that presentation. And also just wanted to include that this proposal is designed to be cost neutral, really just converting the unscheduled hours to scheduled hours, and a modest increase between 3 and 4% of the service for September. So with that, you have the September service change adjustments up on the screen. And we want to just to highlight a few areas of focus. One being the stakeholder engagement process, the COVID-19 impacts, the financial assistance, and the service change proposal going forward. So I'm going to defer to Pauletta for the first few slides. I will be back to hit a few more, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Carter. So Pauletta, I think you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate that. Hello, board members. Just want to re-emphasize the process that I know you're aware of that we started back in February as part of the June service changes that just went into effect. We enhanced our stakeholder engagement process by adding a series of stakeholder listening sessions. And so we started that with the service change that just went into effect. And this then, of course, is the roundup of what we did for what will be the September service changes. So we hosted a number of listening sessions, and this, of course, designed to get input before we brought this to the board, which is what we're doing here tonight, so that we could engage with the people who work with us the most, that oftentimes have the most knowledge of transit and the need for transit service in their communities, to give us some feedback to help inform those service changes. So this was also an opportunity in this round to help educate people about the coming fare study and equity analysis, because they'll, of course, be engaged with us for that. The next slide, please. There we go. So we held the listening sessions between mid-April and mid-May, and we did 8 of these meetings. Some of the extra ones beyond the geographic sector meetings that we've established are some of the local coordinating councils. And then we continued our partnership with Denver Public Schools as we talked to them about how we can best prepare for students going back into the classroom in the fall semester. Those 5 geographic sector meetings that we established from the last round that we did in February and March, those were designed by areas of the region that address travel sheds. And that seemed like a really good methodology, so we kept that for this round. And this, again, was an opportunity for mayors and county commissioners, city and county staff, and TMO, TMA representatives, that's transportation management organizations or transportation management associations. Those folks, all of them who are great partners of ours and positioned to give us good feedback, they engage with us during these meetings. And we had nearly 100 people through the course of the meetings. Some of the things that we heard most commonly through all these meetings were return to work plans. People wanted to know how we were preparing for people coming back into the office or returning to school in the fall. Also, capacity limits. We had people asking us when we were going to lift the capacity limits that we had put into place, which of course went into effect this last Sunday with the June service change. Also continues to be an awful lot of interest in our fare structure and our pass programs, people wanting us to simplify them and in many cases make them more affordable for certain sectors of our communities. Large employers were engaged, people were engaging about how we were going to prepare for large employers bringing their staff back into the office. Flex ride and on-demand service partnerships as a possibility for how we serve people that are not served by fixed route service. Also, reliability and frequency. These are things that we hear a lot, even before COVID, people wanting us to have the most reliable service possible so they can get where they need to go on time. And frequencies. Let's try to do what we can to have more frequencies. Equitable service return, that's always top of mind for us, and it is for our stakeholders. How we're using our federal stimulus funding. We've had inquiries about that. And then people really just appreciating this new process that we started back in February. Go back one slide, please, if you can. Back. Right. Yeah, back a little bit. There we go. Right. There we go. Right there. So just to remind everybody the process that we go through as it relates to our engagement process, obviously these listening sessions then feed into the board listening to our draft service changes, which is tonight. And then we will, of course, take that out to public hearings. And the board will then have the opportunity to see the final service change that we propose and take action on that. And those service changes will go into effect, and the listening phase and engagement happens throughout. But then, of course, we repeat this process as we get ready for the next service change. And as for the meetings that we have coming up, these are on our website, but we'll hold 3 virtual public meetings, one on Monday, June 28th at 5:30, one on Thursday, July 1st at 5:30, and then one on Wednesday, July 7th at noon to give people some opportunity at different times. We will record presentations in English and Spanish. Those will be posted to our website for people to watch anytime they want, and we'll promote those through social media. Again, those are on our website, and you can get to it from the home page where there's a horizontal band that you can click right in and get more information. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Pauletta. I just want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 impacts. We are still in COVID, and I don't think we want to lose sight of that. With that, we are continuing to carry about 40% of our pre-pandemic ridership levels, providing about 64% of service. RTD, however, anticipates gradual increases in ridership and has continued to monitor the capacity needs as part of the recovery effort. As RTD continues to monitor and adjust and exercise nimbleness for service levels, which must really align with our staff's resources that are affected by a myriad of things, one being ongoing attrition rates, a competitive labor market, and we are contingent on really staying in front of this issue, but we are experiencing, issues with the labor market right now. It's very competitive, and trying to do everything that we can to secure additional folks to help us out through recruitment positions, helping us with regard to retention and recruitment, working to work with operators so we maintain them and we can also bring them aboard. We're trying to be more specific about their opportunities here, what this means, how they can be part of something big, and bringing people back, to work. So there's a lot of effort that we're focused on, really trying to address the gap that we have right now in terms of resources. We're also looking at our training and hiring processes and ensuring that we focus on customer skills, providing 2 years of customer service experience, looking for those kind of folks, because we can teach people how to drive or secure a vehicle and operate that. So those are some of the challenges we have under COVID right now. In addition, we're looking at platforms, utilization, banners, podcasts, radio spots, and other things to attract folks to RTD. This next slide really is just talking about considerations that we have to look at as we make decisions. Overall system ridership, what does that look like? How do we make that work? Ridership on route levels or lines support some increase in adjustments, and where are those needed? What does the data tell us? Return work school support increases in service patterns, understanding and where are those pinch points and what do we need to do there? System maintenance and improving on-time performance and reliability, making the tweaks, understanding where we're having some opportunities to make the service more reliable or more efficient. And feedback from our customers is an ongoing thing that we definitely take into consideration. Some of the challenges, the availability of the workforce, as I mentioned, it is a very tight market and we're working very diligently to try to improve upon that, leveraging unscheduled hours into scheduled hours, meaning that extra sessions or extra sections are going into actual service delivery. And again, I want to remind everybody that there's a lot of uncertainty in our ridership returns right now as we continue to move forward. As many of you have heard and acknowledge that Sunday, June 13th, we lift capacities on our vehicles to accommodate gradual increases in ridership. So people can, get on the train and on a bus and understand that we've made those adjustments. We're also trying to align with other transit entities and mirror other transit agencies for what is going on currently in our industry. And again, we're having to adhere to mask mandates, requirements on all public transportation. That goes until September 13th, 2021. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the finances, the assistance that we've been receiving. We received $232 million in CARES Act funding and also $203 million in CARISA funds in 2021. Again, these funds are, not ongoing, but they're here to help us to support transit operations, recall layoff employees, rescind furloughs and pay cuts, providing supplemental service on busier routes. So again, really to help us sustain until things change. Also, there's some other allocation of monies that we've been in receipt of, $338 million in 2021 from the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And again, this is to support uncertainty of transit recovery, support service needs, and maintain workforce. And we're still awaiting some guidelines from the FTA. But again, this money is not ongoing, and we're trying to actually manage it the best we can, given the uncertainty, and providing the service that we continue to strive to do. The other thing I'd like to just focus on is factors in guide service change, and we kind of talked about that previously, but again, RTD's service standards and service utilization is a factor to that, effects on the integrity of the transit network and transit dependent population, availability of alternative services to affect ridership. Title VI and civil rights is also a big component to that, and response to changes in the community and cost-effective distribution and the ability to enhance service when possible are all factors that go into our deliberations as we continue to deliver service. Other things that are part of that is response to changes in the community where services are provided. And again, I mentioned the board adopted guidelines for COVID-19, which we're utilizing as a principle number 3. So with that, I just wanted to, lay that out and then turn the rest of the presentation over to Mr. Carter to talk specifically about September 2021 service proposals.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm not sure if everyone can hear me. I'm using my phone once again rather than a computer. Michael, can you acknowledge?
Fine. You sound fine, Jesse. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with that, I want to just briefly go in. What I'm going to do is list a subset of the proposals. There are currently more than 20 proposals that are in your packet at this point in time. But some of the larger changes actually involve the reinstatement of some of our commuter services and some increases to service on some of our larger lines. For example, the Zero L on South Broadway, we are planning to reinstate that service, which will also support the service that we are currently operating on the Zero on Broadway. We also are looking at improving weekday peak frequency on the Route 10. This will actually help serve both the Route 10 and the Route 1515L along Colfax. We're also planning to reinstate something that we had discontinued more recently, and that's the Route 116X going from the Southwest Jeffco area into the downtown area. And that starts a part of some of the bringing back some of our regular regional services. So next slide, please. So with the 116X again, we look at Southwest Jeffco. We're also proposing to reinstate the Route CV, and what's not on the screen, we're also proposing to reinstate the EV. You might remember that earlier this year, we discontinued those routes due to low productivity, but we believe at this point in time, as we bring back some of the other regional services, we want to try again with that fixed route service coming into downtown. We're also proposing, as it came up in a couple of our stakeholder meetings and via our customer service contacts, we are proposing to reinstate the Route P, which was one of our larger regional services. We are proposing to put that service in place with currently 3 a.m. peak and 3 p.m. peak trips. You also see a number of trips, a number of services that we were proposing in the Boulder and Longmont area, and that is to address a concern that was shared with us through the stakeholder process and also directly from CU Boulder. They are expecting a larger than normal freshman class as many students held off going to school in 2020. And because of that, they're expecting a very large class. So with that, we need to turn on a number of services in Boulder and actually provide a heavier service than we currently are providing. So with that, let's go to the next slide. To summarize the service change, the overall expected financial impact, we expect this to be cost neutral, is designed to be cost neutral. We expect to affect around 34 to 37 full-time employee equivalents. And also this service change currently is estimated to represent about a 78,000 increase in our annualized service hours. So I do want to reiterate, as a matter of fact, that we will be putting in our school trippers that represent service to Denver Public Schools, Aurora Public Schools, and others throughout the area. They may not be represented in the current proposal as it's stated right now, and we will likely be offering those services by way of special service order. So with that, I conclude and turn it back to you, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Jesse. Just some key points I just wanted to acknowledge as we end this presentation. We're poised and trying to address gradual ridership increases, as been stated, accommodate return to work in school. We know that there are going to be issues associated with that we're trying to address. Regional transit network integrity, ridership behavior is uncertain and continuing to keep ourselves on the pulse of that. Being flexible and nimble to make adjustments and changes when and where necessary. And a focus on recruitment and retention is ongoing and as a challenge right now, but we're working through that. So with that, I'll conclude this presentation and we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, Mr. Carter, and Ms. Tonellis. I see a number of the director has their hands up. So I'll run through them in as reasonable an order. I know that Director Catlin was the first person to raise her hand. Director Catlin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have received calls from very tenacious constituents over the past several months since the routes were suspended both to the mountain communities and to South Jeffco. And particularly on the 116X and on the CV and UV. So I really very much appreciate the reinstatement of some limited service on those. And those constituents have been kept aware, but my fear is that a number of those who used to ride that service are not aware of it. And so I would like to reach out to Ms. Tonellis to see how we could probably advertise this a little bit to potential customers who have not seen any service. We can't advertise on a bus because the buses haven't been there. So I would just appreciate some help, maybe with some op-ed editorials or op-ed opinion pieces in some of the local newspapers to get the word out that we have, we're reinstating these services in the September timeframe. And I just wanted to say thank you to our service planners. I know those are not real frequented routes, but they really are about the only routes we have in this area. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Catlin. I'm assuming you'll talk with Ms. Tonellis outside of the meeting.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Director Busick, I believe your hand was up next.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And question, I believe, for Mr. Carter. So one of the routes that starts in my district is the 122X. And I've had a number of calls from people, when's the 122X coming back? And for those of you that don't know, the 122X goes from and to Wagon Road stop, which is 120th and I-25, and ends up at Civic Center Station with a handful of stops along the way. Prior to the pandemic, it had very, very robust ridership and was completely eliminated during the pandemic. So my question is the process of how you determine on a route like that was completely eliminated, how do you determine when the demand is sufficient to reinstate that route if there's no demand because there's no service? That's the question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Director Busick, for that question. That is an excellent question. As you are aware, the 122X is kind of the younger brother of the 120X. The difference between the two is 122X goes to Civic Center Station. So they're typically, prior to COVID, they were particularly ran in tandem with each other. And a person who is trying to get to the CBD or downtown Denver has the option either to use the 120X or the 122X. The biggest difference is that if you work in the southern part of the downtown area, you were better served by the one-seat ride on the 122X going to Civic Center. At this point in time, with the number of operators that we have, and we're kind of in a situation where we have to ration out whether or not a corridor is served well enough. And when we look at the actual ridership on the 120X so far, and we look at it how it's changed over the past year, it just hasn't grown to a point where we feel that the 122X is something that would be well utilized if we were to put that back in just yet. It's not to say that that we wouldn't want to, because previous performance is a part of the assessment. And the 122X is one of the most efficient routes, regional routes in the system. We look forward to, at some point in time, putting that service back in, but we're looking for some indications on the 120X as far as growth to say that, hey, now it's time to look at the 122X. I hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And thanks so much for that response. Thanks for all the hard work you've done. And I want to also tip my hat to Natalie Handlos, who fields many of my offline questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen. I saw Director Whitmore next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would pass along to Jesse my thanks for Natalie's hard work in the North area. She does a great job and has a great deal of history and background. So I won't belabor this too long, but I had some outreach that I talked briefly to Pauletta about from Adams County Public Defender's Office, and the route change that eliminated the stop at the courthouse. And those folks were pretty upset about, especially in the fall or winter, that 1.5 or 2 mile walk that their clients would be needing to utilize. So I'd like to look at, it's not a huge extension. I wouldn't think it'd be a great budget hit. The possibility of reinstatement of that stop in September. So when cold weather hits, a little hard to believe it's going to happen today, but when that hits again, we would have that type of service. So if you think about that, Jesse, I've been meaning to talk to you offline, and I will do so further, Madam Chair. And thank you, Jesse and Michael, for your work on this situation. It's not easy, and we appreciate how thorough you are in your analysis. That's all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Whitmore.
Thank you, Director. Going down the list of hands I saw next was Director Tisdale.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think there were others ahead of me. Specifically, I know Director Bouquet had his hand up before mine, so I would be happy to wait unless you would wish to have me speak now.
I will call on Director Bouquet and Director Lewis and Director Rosenthal and Director Sloan. If you want to wait until the end of those, feel free. If you want to speak, have at it.
I will be happy to wait. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I'll just move you to the bottom of my notes. In that case, I saw Director Lewis next, and I'm going to call on her next.
So the way that Zoom works is it orders folks in the order of their hands raised. So it's actually Director Rosenthal, and so I'll step back as well.
Okay, you can go behind Director Tisdale. I'm letting you know that I do Zoom all day, every day, and it's being very strange right now because I did not see Director Bouquet up before you guys, and we've all moved around. So who would like to go next? Okay, Director Bouquet, you can go next.
Appreciate it. And thank you for those who are allowing me to go at this time. I just wanted to start off with a big thank you for the consideration of the Route P, which is from Parker to downtown. I know I hear a lot from my constituents of how crucial that ride is for them. And they will be quite happy to hear that service will be reinstated, which was the second of 2 services that were lost during the pandemic. The first being the 483, which was restored earlier this week. And then hopefully now we'll be able to restore the Route P in September. So my Parker residents will be quite happy to hear about that. Just out of curiosity, I think I heard that we would have an increase or a need for 34 operators based on this service change. Do we currently have those 34 operators?
Thank you for that question, Director Bouquet. It's 34 full-time equivalents, and that is a mix of part-time operators and full-time operators. So, and it's an excellent question. It is one that we are actually challenged by at this point in time when we look at our day-to-day operations, but we are doing our best to make sure that we have those operators. But I would, have to let others in operations speak to the actual total number of operators that we have at this time.
So if I may add on to what Mr. Carter said, it's important for all those that aren't familiar with how we run an operation to recognize that we have operators that we have employed that readily are available, but then you also have operators that may be out. And Director Bouquet, with you being in the teaching profession, you may understand that you often have substitute teachers there at the ready. That's equivalent to having the extra board. So when you talk about available operators, it's available operators assigned to a router. You could utilize extra board operators, recognizing how we attrit. So it's a complicated question in which you pose whether or not we have 34 operators. We're talking about pieces of work as we qualify it as, and what we're really trying to discern, as Mr. Carter indicated, full-time equivalents to address those pieces of work. So as we look at it holistically, once we come to the realization of what we need to address all those pieces of work, relative to the blocks that we schedule for our overarching service change, we will ensure that we have those readily available as we go forward, because we may leverage part-time more than full-time. So it's a complicated answer. So I wanted to qualify that as such. Mr. Ford, do you have anything else that you feel you should add to my explanation?
This is Michael Ford, COO. No, I think you captured it very well. We're working through that, and obviously we have some challenges, but right now I couldn't give you a specific number, but we are aware of the constraint and what's needed, and we're working towards that at this time.
Thank you.
Perfect. So, I mean, my ultimate question would just be, well, I think thank you for that explanation too, would be, do we have the workforce to ultimately have these September changes be in place, is kind of my overarching question.
So I would say yes, sir, as we go forward, because one thing for certain is we're managing expectations. That's what we reference as we talk about having readily available resources. And if we don't have resources, I think it's incumbent upon us to be transparent about the service delivery model that we would basically be able to leverage. So we will ensure that information is made readily apparent, because another point of the matter is that I know there are past practices done here at this organization in reference to what we termed as mandating regarding people not having adequate time off so we can ensure there was service delivery, but we will look at that in earnest. And Mr. Ford talked about the way we are actually leveraging a new aspect of sourcing candidates relative to ensuring that we have a ready and able workforce as we go forward. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you for the answer. And that is all I have. Director Williams, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm trying to maintain decorum. I will, based on Director Lewis's tips, I will go to the upper left-hand corner and call who I see there, just following Zoom. So there you go. That would be Director Rosenthal.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Directors Lewis and others for sort of shunting me to the front, and I do appreciate their patience in that. So I have to say, wow, it's very difficult. I can only imagine how hard it is to really decide on the difficulty level of which services to restore and when and how and such. And I don't want to come across like I'm picking at somebody. Say, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? It's more sort of open questions. It's not critical in nature. However, so I got a question about the 15, which, as you know, runs along Colfax. And I'm delighted to see in the June changes to increase service from every 15 minutes to every 10 minutes. Just sort of a left field question. Why not increase it to every 5 minutes? This is one of the most demanded services we have in the system. And, from my anecdotal, observations, it is, there are a lot of folks who are always waiting at that bus stop. So is it possible to lower it to every 5 minutes? Or is that desirable? Is that something we could look at?
Director Rosenthal, thank you for that question. Actually dropping, and when you look at the 15 and 15L, you have to look at those services in tandem. And the amount of service that we have out there currently with the 10-minute headway frequency is nearing what we had pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, we were carrying about, between the two of them, 24,000 boardings per day. We are nowhere near those numbers just yet on the 1515L. So something that would be, deserving of a higher level of frequency would have to approach those numbers before we would dip down to that level. But that is a really good question. And yes, East Colfax was our #1 bus route.
And then thank you very much, Mr. Carter. I really do appreciate that. And we will observe, and watch those numbers as they hopefully rebound.
Absolutely.
Right, thank you. My second question is regards to the R line, which goes through Aurora. I did not see any restoration either for June or September, and wondering, and again, I'm trying to pick it here, but I'm just wondering, is there any possibility for restoration on that one as well?
Yes, Director Rosenthal, the route, the R line rather, along with pretty much all of light rail, took some of the harder hits when it came down to retention of ridership. So those lines are only at about 20 to 30% of what they used to be pre-COVID. I think when we look at the most resilient among our rail lines right now, you'd have to look at the University of Colorado A line as having the highest level of ridership and not the R. After that, actually, I was kind of surprised to see how well the W is doing at this point in time as well. But we are definitely keeping an eye on what the ridership looks like. But right now, we have plenty of capacity on the system as it stands right now. You'll also recall that the R line was truncated at Lincoln Station, and extending the route back down to Siri right at this point seems a little bit premature, only because that corridor itself is not seeing high levels of ridership. But of course, as I said before, we will continue to monitor the ridership on those lines.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. In my upper left-hand corner now, I see Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to join Director Bouquet in my genuine and sincere appreciation to staff for being able to find a path to reinstate the Route P from Parker to downtown. Kudos to all on that. It's been a significant area of concern with people in Douglas County, and I had conversations yet today with the transportation director in Douglas County relative to those issues. The question that I have is, do we have any anticipation at this point concerning two other Douglas County routes, that specifically being the 402L through Highlands Ranch, where service has been dramatically reduced, and the 483, which would get people from Parker over to the light rail on the southeast line. So can I have some information, please, relative to your thoughts on 402L and 483? Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. As mentioned by Director Bouquet, June 3rd, I guess it was June 13th, June/14th, we actually re-implemented the Route 483, so it is back in service. The Route 402L at this point is, it's prior, this is where we go back to looking at prior performance. it was not exactly the most heavily utilized route. However, its priority and as far as returning it back to service is lower than some of the other arterial services that we have in the Douglas County area, such as I want to say Route 99L and other routes that go into the downtown area. So I'm not saying that we won't reinstate the 402L, but it's because of its ridership profile, it's in a lower tier of routes that we would be looking at returning at this point in time. However, I want to remind everyone that we are still in the proposal process right now. We have yet to hear from the public. So I haven't heard a lot from 402L riders just yet, but perhaps we'll hear something during this process.
I thank you very much, and I appreciate your keeping that in mind. And forgive me for forgetting about the 483 comment. I had an age advantage moment and lost track of that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Director Sloan.
Yes. First, thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. And thank you, Mr. Ford and Mr. Carter. I realize this is an incredibly complex process that I am just learning about. But like many of my fellow directors, I would like to call attention to a gap in service and the lack of any transit alternatives, and that's the GS line that goes from Boulder through Arvada to Golden and on to NREL. So it affects 3 RTD districts. You can expect to hear a little bit more about this, but at this time I'm calling attention to it. I have received several emails from individuals, but I have also received letters from the Colorado School of Mines, NREL, the City of Golden, and I have seen letters from Coalition of Boulder Interests and Arvada, and they all indicate that the GS line is an important service. And I would also like to point out that Arvada has built a park and ride around the GS service, and it has been discontinued. The City of Golden has constructed, as part of their Complete Streets program, bus parking for the GS line. And it appears to me that NREL and Mines are perfect transit partners. So I would like to, have a meeting of these folks to consider the GS line reinstatement. But again, I appreciate it's a complex problem, and I look forward to hearing about this.
Okay, thank you, Director Sloan. I would ask that the letters that you're in receipt of, it would be fantastic if you could share those letters with us, and so we can actually put it into the board report as far as requests for services for this September service change. So it'd be great if you could supply us with those. And with that, I haven't received a lot of requests coming from the GS, but of course, like I said, we are in this process and we are still gathering information from the public and from stakeholders as we go through this. However, it should be noted that the GS was, upon the time that we actually canceled that service was along with the EV and CV routes. And of those, it had I want to say it had the lowest ridership. We even had a trip that had 1 person on it. And with that, I will say that, again, I would like to hear directly from or receive the letters that you have from the School of Mines, City of Golden, and if you have any communication from NREL and the Fed Center. So thank you.
I do, and I will send them directly to you, but I also forwarded them to the service change email.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sloan and Mr. Carter. Director Tisdale, you are still in my upper left-hand corner because your hand is up. Do you have an additional question?
No, I do not, Madam Chair, but I do have an inability to lower it because every time I hover over that,
Okay.
the mute and unmute button comes up and interferes with that. So I'm working on it.
Okay, so we'll just leave you there for now. The next person then in the order would be Director Davidson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies if I've jumped any order or anything like that. Thank you. I'll be quick. Mr. Carter, thank you for the presentation and going through these. Just a real quick question. Given that we're doing a lot of restoration and going back to some previous schedules for our customers, if they're going online, looking at the service changes, is there a way for them to look when we say things like going back to a previous schedule or reinstating a previous schedule? Is there a way for them to access exactly what that schedule means?
Director Davidson, that's an excellent point, an excellent question. At this point, yes, you could, if you know how to use our website well, which I have to admit, I'm not the best user of our website, but you can go back and look at the pre-COVID schedules. A lot of our customers do have, former public timetables of the services that they used as well. So I think what I'm hoping to hear through the public hearing process are questions, and we are getting lots of questions coming from former users, where I'm hoping to get a little even more input from them as we make the choices to which trip has the greater amount of likelihood that it will be well utilized. So right now, the proposals themselves are a little vague. They will become less vague as we make our final recommendations. And again, we're using the customer input to kind of inform the decisions as to how the schedule should be formed.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Davidson and Mr. Carter. I believe, Eric, that on the front page of the RTD website, there is a folded map. And my guess is that most of the routes, so you click on that map and you can scroll right down and see your house or your constituent's house and the closest routes. And then if you click on the bus there, it will take you further down to show you what the routes are. And you can click on that, it'll give you the route schedule. That's right on the front page in the top banner. And I would guess that most of those schedules up there are the pre-COVID schedules, although I can't swear to that. But that is certainly a good place to go and see the schedules. Buses, trains, it's all there. If you need further help with that, I'd be happy to help you with it offline.
Yeah, thank you. There's some historics that aren't lining up. I'll take it offline, but thank you.
You're welcome. Director Lewis, you are now in the upper left-hand corner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the staff for putting this information together. Actually, I have a few questions. So there are some services. So I was contacted about the 100L, but I'm not asking about that, but I just wanted to give an example. There are some services that were discontinued, at least on a temporary basis, and there may be a chance that those aren't going to return. And so I'm curious as to how we are communicating in term agency-wide on what is coming and what may not be coming back. Because I'd like to be able to share that with my constituents.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. And you're right, it's hard to keep up with both the COVID change and the changes that occurred in May 2020. It's almost like we need a refresher as to what was decided May 20 as far as routes that were discontinued, because as you may remember, we were in a situation in which we were discontinuing service. And I want to say it was a pretty sizable change. I remember doing 20 public hearings for May 20th, and we probably need to put together some form of information that says these routes were permanently discontinued, and these are the routes that were discontinued by by COVID, but are expected to return. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. That would just be really helpful, that delineation. So I really appreciate your willingness to do that. And then, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong. Do we typically make these changes in September, or does that happen in August? For some reason, I'm thinking August, but the paperwork says September.
You're not normally, yes, but
Okay.
it should be according to the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement that we have between ATU 1001 and RTD. The actual date of the change in fall is actually September. We normally do it in August because we have the flexibility of moving 2 weeks back or 2 weeks ahead. We normally do it in August to take care of so we don't have to do as many school trippers on special service order. So we make it a run. So that's why we do it in August, but this time it's in September.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. I appreciate that. And then the rest of my questions are actually for Pauletta, so I'll give you a heads up, Pauletta, that a few questions are going to come to you. I wanted to clarify with the listening sessions from April 15th through May 14th, that if I'm looking at this packet here on packet page 6, that was the first step in this expanded engagement process lifecycle. Is that correct?
That's correct. That for the one that's for the September service change, yes.
Okay, and then the proposed are the public hearings that step are the 3 meetings that you cited for June and July?
Correct. So we have the 3 meetings set for June 28th, July 1st, and July 7th.
Is that the step in the engagement process?
It is, yes, it's the public hearing process specifically. So it's once we take the draft service plan to the board, then we open it up for public input. That's these 3 meetings that'll happen June 28th, July 1st, and July 7th.
Okay, I'm sorry, my internet connection kind of got a bit unstable, so I missed that answer. I'm very sorry.
Not a problem. So the meetings that happened in April, May were to inform the process that is the service plan, that is the draft plan that will now be released to the public hearing process, where we can have widespread public input. And those are the meetings, June 28th, July 1st, July 7th.
Okay, that makes sense. So that is in this engagement process. I'm just trying to make sure I know where we are in this step. We're on the 4th step of this life cycle. The public hearing, or those dates would be in the 4th step of that life cycle.
Of course, yes, you've got that right.
Okay, and are you, when folks are attending, are we collecting any demographic data, like anything? You know, who they are, where they're, you know, their age, their sex, their race, their income, their what route they are taking, any of that?
Yes, Director. No, yes, I hear you. And no, we don't do that. So sorry about that kind of bizarre, depiction. Okay. But we don't collect that kind of information in the listening sessions or in the public hearing process. So that hasn't been part of our process to this point.
Okay. And then in this process, specifically as it relates to outreach, what's the metric that you all are using to measure success? So yeah, I'll stop there.
So for the new process that we put into place, which was more of the precursor to the draft service plan. So that new process of the stakeholder listening sessions, what we've wanted to see is how many people are participating with us, of the folks that we invite to those meetings, and the value that the feedback we get from them in helping to inform those service changes. We don't have a specific measurement on that that's tracking, how many comments about the P or how many comments about specific routes. But what's been helpful to the team, and I would ask Jesse to weigh in if he would have anything more, is the expansive comments that we're getting in many different categories, I think are helping the staff to look at things across the board, that maybe there are certain elements or dynamics of things happening in a community that the staff can then say, that's interesting. And that helping to inform the changes that we bring to you. Now, I did hear Mr. Carter earlier give some specific examples of things with specific routes that then they did actually make those things happen in this draft plan. So Mr. Carter, you might be able to give some other feedback.
Sure. Thanks, Pauletta. One of the things that we look for is, of course, when in any type of engagement, is how much communication is stirred up. It's not just the meeting itself, but the conversations that happen before and after that. So to give you an example, I believe our stakeholder process this time around, Pauletta, you might remember that we had a meeting with DPS towards the end of January, or I want to say early February. And that in that meeting, we learned a little bit more about their plans of returning to school. And we were able to have some conversations about some of the stressors that impact actually DPS's Yellow Bus program that kind of mirrored our the problems or challenges that we share. So we were able to have a really good conversation with them and get a better idea or a better understanding and actually impact some of the decisions that they were making about bell times, which of course is something that we deal with year to year. Also, as far as the stakeholder process, we ended up having a number of conversations with, again, not just the singular stakeholders represented in the municipality of Boulder, but Boulder Valley School District, along with Boulder County and the CU Boulder campus. So in those conversations, we learned about their extra sized freshman class having been impacted by COVID. So through those conversations, we learned about, their plans of return to work and return to school. So there's a lot of information that's coming in from the stakeholder that's value add to what we normally hear in our customer input. What I'm hoping to hear is even more coming from the customers as they become a little more curious about their particular routes, if they have already been mentioned or were not mentioned in the proposals for September. So I'm hoping that helps answer the question.
It does. I have one follow-up. So once folks convene in these meetings, is there a survey or an assessment or any input or debrief that we might collect from folks to gauge the usefulness, or if how they might have found out about the meeting? Things that might help, it might inform us on reaching out to a broader set of our audience, our ridership, our potential ridership.
Yeah, Director, that's a great question. This whole process, since we had the pandemic, actually, we've had to try things that we've never tried before, right? So we went into virtual meetings with the attitude that we were going to adjust things as we needed to, and we did do that. And so it's the same with the listening sessions we've done with stakeholders. We've massaged a few things as it relates to some of the stakeholders that we added to the mix. And yet that's something we're open to. It's part of what we do after each one of these processes is we take a look at this went really well, or these were times that we held meetings that were successful, where we got more people, this not so much. And so we adjust that. What we have learned is that doing a noontime virtual meeting, for instance, and still doing some evening sessions works well, because people like to go to these things at different times. And so we have adjusted our schedule for those. We'll continue to do so. Your idea about a survey, I think, is an interesting one, and it's something that we could look at pursuing.
Yeah, I think at minimum, it might be interesting for us to just know how people heard about the meeting and if the meeting is useful. I think, at bare minimum, that's two questions, but I will let you all chew on that, and we can have the conversation at a later date. I do wonder, in terms of metrics, if I don't know the specific number in terms of ridership, but looking at 100 attendees, I think, oh my gosh, there's so many folks within our region, and we're able to connect with 100 people. Is there a way that we might be able to create a metric that's based on the number of potential folks that we might reach? And I don't know what that percentage might be. I'm just spitballing this, and so I'm happy to hear from you. I see General Manager Johnson, so bring it to me.
Yeah, so I would just like to say, as it relates to key performance metrics and activities associated with such, I know it's a favorite topic of everyone as we talk about strategic planning, but basically as we talk about activities, these are the things that we're working on in earnest as we create a scorecard so we can ascertain the activities in which we are doing are yielding some success, hence the success outcomes you identified. So when we look at the population in which we're trying to attract, basically looking at the universe holistically and discerning what would constitute success relative to, the participation, what we're setting as a baseline to ensure that we are garnering a level of information that would enable us to make informed decisions about the service delivery models. And that's something we're working through now. So I appreciate the comment put forward. And there's work that's being done with Ms. Tanilis's group as we talk about this as well. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And happy to hear from anyone else if you wanted to add to that, but that is sufficient if not. Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the work in this, and I appreciate you all taking this feedback. And the last thing that I will say, at least in my mind, the most controversial thing what we do is get rid of routes, right? And so for me, I mean, at least in my district, it gets pretty messy. And so for me to see 100 participants show up when we have really big changes, it begs the question, at least for me, is are there other things that we might do to get people to know what's happening within the district, or are they just completely disengaged? Maybe that's the question, but it's not a question, it's more of a comment. And I am done, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Lewis. That was a good discussion. I think everybody agrees. Thank you, Ms. Tanilis. Okay, I see Director Geisinger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I do agree with some of the Director Lewis's comments. I think it would be great if we can drum up more comment, although in my area, I guess they're pretty attentive generally. Thanks, Jesse and Michael, and to your team. I'll add my thanks about Natalie in here too for all your hard work and for your attention to the fact that CU, which is a huge employer and student body, is bringing everybody back. That is important. You mentioned, I think maybe Michael mentioned, or one of you mentioned that school tripper routes may be added. Did I understand that correctly? That there may be additional routes or runs added on the school tripper runs, and when would those be added and how would we know and all of that?
Okay, Director Geisinger, yes, you did hear that correctly. The way that we have done it in the past when we have September run boards is we have to do it via a special service order. So that's kind of the reason why I mentioned it, is because it's not listed in the proposals just yet, but we will have to conduct those on special service orders, with the exception of the 204 and the 206, which are included in the proposal. And the reason why they are included in the proposal is because of our past experience with some of the special service orders and providing the service there. We're attempting to cure some of the variability in schedule by making sure that those are voted runs.
So there would be others, like I think the 209 might be a school tripper route. There are others that would be added back in as you get closer to school, or Jesse, or what's the process there?
So right around the time that the school period starts, and that's actually latter August, we would be adding school trippers back in. Those would include routes like the 1W in the Denver area, the 72 W as well. We're looking at trying to provide service there. That's in, I want to say, the Westminster area, and others. There's a whole list of what we characterize as our school trips that basically provide additional service, so that our regular route that runs adjacent to that school doesn't overcrowd. So where we have duplicative service, we won't have the school trippers, but in areas where we know that the capacity of the fixed route service going by it will be challenged, we will be providing those school trippers. And in the next set of proposals, as we bring forward the recommended action, we'll include more information regarding the school trippers.
Great, thanks. And I think I saw in a response to a constituent that you would be watching the ridership on the Flatiron Flyer. Do we have the capacity to add service between run boards? If it looks like that the FF1 is getting huge capacity, a lot of ridership?
Usually if we have trips that are having to start pass ups, if we have a northern loop extra, and with the Flatiron Flyer, we operate what's called a Flatiron Flyer loop extra. So I would say yes, in a sense. We would rather, make sure that we schedule enough service. And right now, looking at the current capacity on the Flatiron Flyer, it's going to take a pretty big swing before we're really challenged as far as capacity on that line.
Okay, thank you. I have some other specific questions that I probably would like to get in touch with you and Natalie Handlos.
Absolutely.
One I have is just sort of the process of the meetings and all. For instance, people who have been commenting all along, Heatherwood, I know you and I have received a number of comments. My understanding is that BVSD has worked out the restroom issues for the drivers. I'm still hearing from people. Should they be coming to this public meeting? I guess you want to.
Yes, right. They should be coming to it because BVSD, while they may have allowed for our operators to use their facility, BVSD also has moved their school routes out from the area as well, which might increase demand. So that's something we learned in talking to them through the stakeholder process. So yes, and I would appreciate even direct communication with your constituents that have requests.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I have an issue now because I thought Director Deschel was next, but Director Lewis shows up in the left-hand corner of my screen, so I'm going to call on her based on the Zoom rules.
Director Deschel can go ahead. It's my second time.
You guys are making me nuts. Okay, Director Deschel.
Thank you, and thank you so much, everyone, for the work on this. I want to really dive in a little bit deeper on the school issue and sort of the ability to vote and how that works with the union, just because we do have a substantial number of students, whether they use a school run or not, who rely on our services not only to get their education, but to get 2 meals a day for some of our most impacted populations. And I just want to make sure that those routes will be not only adequately staffed, but that they're there not just for the first day of school, but when kids are able to do walk-in registration, which happens in early August, to register for classes, or for some kids get their uniforms, or for some kids get their RTD passes if their school provides those for them. And so what does it mean for it to be a special run, I believe is what you said, versus an actual run, and making sure that those routes are staffed so that our kids can learn, that they can be well fed, because they don't all just take the school run. A lot of them, I sit with them on the Zero or on other routes, who take our normal routes because of how Denver Public Schools and school districts across the state with our choice system.
Director Deschel, that's a great question. So when I say special service order, it's basically identifying the start of a trip, and it is a regularly scheduled trip, but it's provided not necessarily on the current written schedule. It's likely to be picked up with the September service change, but prior to the September change going into service, that trip would be offered via the special service order, which basically gives an operator the information they need to provide that particular trip. Okay, so it's a regularly set time of trip, and it may line up perfectly with the September service change trip, but it's provided in during the summer run board.
And historically, how well, you said likely, historically, what percentage of those trips get picked up? If you happen to know off the top of your head, which you know a lot, but you might not.
No, I don't know that much. I've got some hobbies, and I sleep as well. So, well, in looking at if you're asking about the performance of special service orders, there's a high percentage of times that they actually operate. Of course, because they're operated off of the extra board and not necessarily on a voted piece of work, there can be some challenges due to absenteeism in providing the trips. So that's where they're less desirable than something that has been voted, but they are, something that we are attempting to do on a regular scheduled basis.
Got it. Well, I guess I would just, if we can, encourage us to maybe flex those 2 weeks into August for our kids to know that they can get to school and know that they can get the food that they need.
Understood.
Okay. Director Lewis.
Yeah, I just had one follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair. For Pauletta, you mentioned that the next round of meetings for June and July were being advertised on our website, and I was curious to see other places in which we were communicating that out.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, on the website, and we'll be doing social media as well as a couple of different news releases. We also already have pushed it out in some of our electronic newsletters, and we'll continue to do that over the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Have you all ever, I'm going to say it out loud, but it's weird saying it because these are happening via Zoom, but I'm going to ask anyway. Consider the reverse calls that we do for the telephone town halls to get folks to participate, which is kind of weird because you're telling them to get off the phone and get onto Zoom.
Yeah, so what you're talking about with the robocalls, if you will, where we let people know that we're going to be doing telephone town halls like the next night, and then we call them and say, hey, hang on the line and participate with us. That is specific to the telephone architecture that we use for the telephone town hall meetings. That isn't something that we utilize through Teams or through Zoom. I'm not aware of an element of that within the technology that would allow us to do that. It's sure something we could look at. We have some IT people on the line, so they hear this. So maybe we can talk offline tomorrow about that. I like the idea. I think it would be a little more unwieldy given the fact that this is usually an opt-in and people do this by choice to join our meetings. And so to call out to people through some kind of a robo email or something might be a little more difficult, but it does bring up an interesting topic that we can look at what kind of technology is like that. I would say, one of the ways that we communicate also about these meetings and other information that we think is important is utilizing our city and county and regional communications partners. They then communicate on our behalf through their channels. And so that's something out there that we utilize as well.
Okay, thank you so much. That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you for the second round.
No problem. Okay. There's a director who didn't talk. That would be me. I'd really like to thank Jesse and Michael Ford and everybody involved in this process for all of the work and the thought that they put into it. I know it's hard when there are 15 directors, each of whom is looking for service in the area in which they are elected. I have many riders in my district A also that are excited about any return to service. The last 2 times that I was on an RTD vehicle in the last couple of weeks, they were packed, just FYI. So that's great. We are all glad to see that. And we have the proverbial chicken and egg situation where, do we have riders? Do we have routes? We don't have routes because we don't have riders. We don't have riders because we don't have routes. And I really, really appreciate the thought that you all are putting into this. Pauletta, I took those links that we got and that are now on the website and sent them out to everybody in my contact. I sent them to Dottie, I sent them to Dr. Cog, I sent them to all of the LCCs and some of the TMAs and asked that they be distributed. So I sent them to a number of the homeless organizations that are in my district, to the rhinos. So I think that we will have participation to some degree. And I just wanted to let you know that we are always happy to share that information. I'm sure the rest of the directors are all doing the same thing. because we want to hear what our constituents have to say. That's what this is all about. So thank you all. I do not see any other hands up on this discussion. Last chance. Got one more that just occurred to you? No? Okay. So I'm going to end this discussion. And the next part of our meeting tonight is other matters. And I'm wondering if Director Cook just popped up in my left-hand corner, if you would like to speak under other matters.
I do, Madam Chair, and thank you very much. And thanks everybody for the good questions in the last discussion item. I wanted to tell you about a meeting I went to a week ago. It was at 2160 South Broadway, and it was a breakfast meeting, so I needed to be there at rush hour. And to get there by car, I would be taking 3 highways and an arterial, and then turning on Broadway and pulling in and parking. But I opted to take trains and get down there. And I made it there in 50 minutes from the moment I walked onto a train. It was remarkable. So I was first struck by the idea of just bravo our system. I mean, and bravo the people who made it happen. And then the second thing was the importance and freedom that being comfortable with transferring meant for me. In addition to it requiring all those changes, exits and merging and stuff like that in a car, it required 3 trains, and I could have made it a bus as well. So 2 or 3 transfers in order to make it there in a time frame that was better than a car at that time of day and competitive with it other times of day. So I just wanted to express appreciation too for the travel training that our communications people do, and that our TMAs and Dr. Mack and others do, because I think getting people comfortable with that, with a transfer, makes the system work better for them in many ways. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Director Cook. I appreciate that. And also the work that has gone into our apps, which we have continued to update. The paratransit apps these days are just really helping people know where their ride is and when they can get on it. And our website and our handheld apps and those of many of our partners on the Lyft app and on the Uber app. It's great to help people get around. That's what we're all about. We're helping people get where they want to go when they want to go there. Okay, anybody else under other matters? Okay, hearing nothing, our next meeting date is July 13th, 2021. Same time, same back channel. We'll be here on Zoom, and we are adjourned at 7:11 p.m. I'm going to ask for a 4-minute comfort break. Can we do 4 minutes and come back to the next meeting at 7:15? Director Catlin, would that work for you? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
Good evening.
Hi, welcome.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
as Director Tisdale mentioned, I'm also having some trouble with my toggle, so the toggle switch. I'd like to call to order the Financial Administration and Audit Committee on June 15th, 2021 at 7:16 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you're recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that under the current circumstances, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meeting, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com and scroll to the bottom of the page for the link to the board of directors. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, I would ask you to please raise your virtual hand and for me to call you before proceeding to speak. Speaking out of turn will only add confusion to the record and to the proceedings. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing star 9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press star 6. Note that we will not be taking public commentary during this meeting. Members of the public interested in speaking directly to the board are encouraged to do so during the monthly board. For future meeting dates, please refer to the board's meeting portal located at rtd.iqm2.com. We have already had our safety briefing that was delivered very capably by Director Williams, so we will not repeat that again. But we do have 2 recommended actions on the agenda this evening. Our first recommended action is for the Board of Directors to adopt Regional Transportation District's annual comprehensive financial report that includes audited financial reports relating to the year ended December 31st, 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Tisdale.
Is there a
Second, Broom.
Thank you. And now we'll have our staff presentation. For that, we have our Chief Financial Officer, Doug McLeod, and Byron Ayton, Senior Manager of Accounting, and they can introduce our guests from Plant Moran to give tonight's presentation. Doug?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good evening. So this is this action item is a culmination of completing the audit, the financial statement audit for 2020. So as Chair Catlin mentioned, joining me tonight is Byron Ayton, who is our Senior Manager of Accounting, as well as Pam Hill, who is a partner with Plant Moran, our external auditors, and finally Sean Hickey, from Plant Moran, who is the Assurance Senior Manager. A couple items, just housekeeping items I'd like to cover just quickly is that just a reminder that the audit team of Pam and Sean were here back in February to give their pre-audit communications, and this meeting they are here to talk about their required communications for closing out the audit. I'd also like to mention that this is our first year with Plant Moran. We previously had a different contractor for prior fiscal years. We've been very impressed and very happy with the service and the support that Plant Moran has given us through this audit process. It was also new for them, learning the ropes with RTD and our nuances here at the Regional Transportation District. I want to thank them and their teams for all their hard work and all the hours they put in, as well as Byron's team here at RTD. A lot of hours, a lot of work. I think we had a successful outcome. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Pam to walk through a short presentation and give her required communications to the board as the governing body of RTD, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So Pam, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate that introduction. And thank you to the Board of Directors for allowing us to present here tonight. I believe, Sean, you are going to be sharing your screen. So if you want to go ahead and pull up the presentation. And Sean, I don't know if you're not muted, but I cannot hear you.
I thought I was not muted.
Oh, okay, now I hear you. Thank you.
Can you see can you see my screen?
No.
Oh. Try that again. Okay. Let's try that again.
There we go.
Okay.
Starting to pop up now. All right. Thank you very much. So as Doug mentioned, we were back here, talking to you back in February. So we wanted to just kind of give just a brief introduction to the team that's here today. Sean, if you want to go to the next slide. Just talk a little bit about the audit process, how that went, and then we're not going to spend a lot of time on the numbers today. It is June, so the numbers are about 6 months old, and I know your team internally keeps you updated monthly on the status of the financial progress that you've made since 12/31. So again, just wanted to give a quick introduction. My name is Pam Hill. I'm audit partner with Plante Moran. I head up Plante Moran's national transportation practice. And Sean Hickey, who is a senior manager at Plante Moran. Both of us are part of the national transit practice at Plante Moran. And we actually at Plante have a dedicated team of governmental experts that have chosen to further specialize in transit agencies. And so all the members of your team that Doug spoke of from Plante, all are a part of that group and work with other transit agencies across the country. So excited to be here and really appreciative of the opportunity to work with the district. So just a little bit about our team structure. So besides Sean and I, we actually do have another a partner who was involved and did an additional review on the district's financial statements in order to assist the team. And then also we have a transit technical specialist who work closely with Doug and Byron and team as they maneuvered through some new accounting pronouncements that were required to be adopted by the district this year. We also had our single audit specialist that helped on the federal compliance side, and then a few other staff that helped with all the day-to-day work. As Doug mentioned, we did spend over 800 hours this year auditing the books and records of the district. So we really do, we appreciate Doug's kind words, but we do really appreciate the hard work of Doug, Byron, Tom, and really the entire team. I know they spent a lot of time getting ready for the audit, but also working with us throughout all those items as we work through the course of the audit. So Sean, if you want to go to the next slide. So there are a few deliverables within your packet today that I just wanted to make sure to touch on. So the first would be the annual comprehensive financial report, which is the largest of the PDFs in your packets, 100 plus pages. So within that deliverable, I did want to point out the first few pages, pages 1 and 2, and that would be our opinion letter. So that would be what the district hires Plante Moran to provide. We did provide an unmodified opinion this year, which is the highest level of assurance that you can receive from your auditors, and basically means that you can rely on the numbers as they are presented within the financial statements. You may have noticed, if you were to kind of compare this year's statements to last year's statements, that they looked a little bit differently this year. And that is because the district did implement a new accounting standard this year related to fiduciary activities. This did require quite a bit of extra work for both teams, and 2 new funds were added to the financial statements, the 401A plan and the salary DB plan. So these activities have always been a part of the district's financial information and have been kind of back in the footnote disclosures in the past. But In order to allow for a more consistency and transparency in reporting, this new accounting standard required them to be more prominent within the financial statements. So you would have noticed that difference as you kind of compare last year to this year. Next, we also have an ended audit letter addressed to the board, which we will go through in a little more detail over the next few slides. And we did have a single audit report or a federal compliance report. You could think of it that way. And we are happy to report that we did not have any findings related to the internal controls over financial reporting, nor did we have any findings related to compliance with federal grants. And we do have a slide later just to show the increased amount of federal spending in fiscal year 2020 due to some of the CARES Act funding. I believe Mr. Ford talked about that earlier. So you will get to see some numbers related to that, related to fiscal year 2020. We also were hired to prepare the agreed upon procedures report related to the general manager's contract. During fiscal year 2020, there were actually 3 different general manager contracts that we reviewed, and that report was also included for your review. And lastly, we are currently working through the procedures related to the National Transit Database, which is reporting up to the FTA that the district is required to do every year. We have made some really good headway on that, and we are working with Doug, Byron, and their team to finalize that over the coming weeks. So Sean, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is, if you recall back when I was visiting with you back in February, we talked about the plan for the audit. And as part of the audit process, we're required to brainstorm around any potential risks that may require us to do additional audit testing. And so these were the risks that we had identified during our brainstorming. We did perform additional procedures which around these transactions, as you'll see on this slide. And we are happy to report that we did not have any additional findings as a result of those procedures. And I believe, Sean, you are going to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Pam.
Yeah.
So the next few slides that I'm going to go through is really the required communications that auditors need to report to those charged with governance. Much of this information is included in the letter, end of audit letter that Pam referred to. But what we do is we like to just highlight it here and just kind of go through those required communications. So the first one is our responsibility under audit professional standards. We express an opinion on the fairness of the financial statements by testing and coming up with reasonable assurance to form our opinion. And as Pam mentioned, the district received an unmodified opinion for their financial statements for December 31st, 2020. The plan, scope, and timing of the audit, all of our planning, risk assessment, and the rest of our procedures, the time frame was conducted from January through May. And as Pam mentioned, we work closely with Doug and Byron and the team, especially through March, April, and May to get the bulk of the work done. And of course, there was significant additional work due to the implementation of a new government accounting standards. Any significant accounting policies and practices, we are required to let you know that there were no transactions that lacked authoritative guidance or no transactions that were recognized in a period different than when the transaction occurred. We're also required to point out significant accounting estimates. And one of the most significant accounting estimates is pension liabilities. As Pam mentioned, there are 2 new funds within the district's financial statements relating to pensions. And those pensions have what we call long-term liabilities. And mainly what that is there's certain aspects of the future obligations that need to be estimated and recorded in the district's financial statements. Each of the funds has an actuary that projects out those long-term estimates. And that's something that we have to audit as part of our audit of the district. Some other required communications, again, we'll mention they adopted a new government accounting standard, GASB 84, which related to what they call fiduciary activities. And we had to work, again, closely with Doug and Byron And we determined that 2 of those pension funds under this new accounting standard were required to be presented in the district's financial statements. I'm happy to report there were no difficulties encountered in performing the audit. We didn't have any disagreements with management. We did have one identified what we call a past disclosure. Because of the new accounting standard, there were certain disclosures that are required under the new accounting standard specific to, in this case, the long-term money rated rate of return. And the standard requires 10 years of that to be presented in a supplemental schedule. But because of the implementation of the standard in the current year by the district, to go back and try and historically recreate that to get it in the financial statements, we felt was not a cost benefit and didn't feel like that would be material to the financial statements as a whole. So, but we just have to let you know that that was one past footnote disclosure from the new accounting standard. We did receive a management representation letter dated May 27th, 2021. And that representation letter was management's assertion that they provide us with full and open access to all their accounting records. And they asserted to the fact that all the information that they provided to us that we audited was accurate to their best of their knowledge. This is just some additional information that we like to provide to the board, and this is information that we also provide to management of the RTD. We have a COVID-19 resource center, so internally our professional standards group monitors closely the activity that's coming from the federal government. We like to monitor available federal funding. In addition to that, there is a new government accounting standard, number 87, leases. And I know Doug and Byron are happy that this actually doesn't have to be implemented until the fiscal year 2022. And that will give them a break for this 2021 year after having to implement GASB 84 in the recent fiscal year. We also have resources for information technology controls and cybersecurity. And then also, just to mention, the district will be applying for the GFOA Certificate of Achievement. And that process is automated where they will submit their annual comprehensive financial report to the GFOA to get that certificate. And then we'll also keep in contact for any other upcoming accounting standards to make sure that we work closely with Doug and his team to address any sort of issues up front that might affect the district and their financial statements. As we mentioned, we just thought the next 2 slides really, we thought would be beneficial to the board just to bring it to your attention because the pension information is now recorded in the financial statements, these 2 funds, as well as footnote disclosures. So we just decided to give you an excerpt of the funding progress of 2 of the pension plans. I would like to point out though, as you probably are aware, the pension plans are really administered and have a separate board that really monitor and keep track of the funding progress for each of the separate pension plans. But because this is in the district's financial statements, we thought it'd be something just to point out, especially because this is the first year that a lot of this pension information is being presented in the district's financials. So this is just a funding progress for the ATU 1001 pension plan. And you can see it shows a funding percentage over the last 5 years. The second one is the salaried employees. Again, this has a separate board who monitors the activity and the funding progress of the pension plan. And this is just, again, a historical funding percentage, and this information is presented in the district's financial statements. Pam mentioned earlier about the federal awards, which would fall under what we call our single audit report. And we thought it'd just be a good opportunity to kind of show you historically over the last 5-6 years how much federal expenditures the district has had. And as you can see, there was a significant increase of over 200 million in the current fiscal year. And as you guys you're all aware that that had to do with the CARES Act because of significant shortfall in the revenue because of the pandemic. The transit agencies all received CARES Act funding. And so much of that funding obviously was spent for operations and payroll and services that to continue the district to continue performing. And I think that's it. Pam, did you want to wrap up?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I think so. That was all we had planned to cover today. But again, happy to answer any questions or also I'll probably turn it back over to Doug then.
Oh, thank you, Pam and Sean. And that concludes our comments, and we'd be happy to take questions, Madam Chair, if you're ready.
Yes, I'd like to ask the directors to raise their hand if they do have any questions. I would like to reiterate that the next on the agenda is a discussion about some technical details on the pension plans. So I would ask that since Pam and Sean were just auditing and required to report those two items on the financial purpose, but district is required to report them in the financial statements, so they subsequently audited them, but they're really not here to answer questions about those pension plans. I don't see any hands raised for our guests. Does anyone have any? I would like to thank.
I see Director Rosenthal has his hand up, Director Catlin.
Thank you. I did not see that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I do have a question. As I recall from the APTA sort of analysis that they had done, there was a question about the number of internal auditors that we have at RTD. And my question is and I don't know how the auditors work, the ones who just presented. Do they actually work together with our auditors, or do they work directly with senior leadership team, or who do they work with on a daily basis getting the information that they need?
Sure, thank you. This is Doug McLeod. Great question. So we actually have two sets of auditors. We have our internal audit team, which is the team that the APTA peer review reviewed their responsibilities and what you heard about. Those are actual employees of RTD. With Plant Moran, we have contracted with them for a specific scope of work to audit our financial statements and provide an independent view and independent opinion of our financial statement presentation, as well as the other items that were listed. So really two separate groups looking at two separate things. But in regard to your question as to who they work with, Plant Moran comes in and works with our team to get information. That begins in the fall timeframe with pre-audit work, and then rolls into this timeframe where we complete the audit. Whereas they're primarily looking at our financial statements and our presentations and our disclosures that are required by many regulatory bodies. On the other side, we have our internal auditors, which primarily report to the board of directors of RTD and are under their direction for their work. So basically two separate functions there is how I would characterize that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, so just summarizing what you're saying, Doug, is that they work directly with you and they do not work with our auditors internally. They work directly with you and the other senior leadership team and your members of the team. Okay, I just wanted to kind of see how that relationship is.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, Director Rosenthal. What I would add, though, is although they work with us, they do have a professional responsibility to provide an independent opinion and report directly to the. Yes. So.
I mean, like they request documents from you. They have questions for you about the documents and the files and the data.
Correct.
So there's what I mean is the interaction is between you two. Okay.
Correct.
And then.
Go ahead.
I'm not trying to be critical in my questioning. This is for the auditors. Just want to, say so they were responsive and everybody was great to work with. And would you say that it was on par with other companies you worked with? The responsiveness, the time frame, and the amount of information that you got, Ms. Hill and Mr. Hickey.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And especially, a first year, whenever you switch auditors, and Doug mentioned this a little bit, it takes them a little while to get used to what we're asking for and us to get a little bit used to your processes and obviously your controls and things like that as we get into those details. But definitely more than responsive. We had many calls, almost daily, especially during the end of the audit. And so, I think our teams worked together really well and really kind of complemented each other. So I think it went very well.
Great, and that answers my question. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our senior leadership team for working so closely with the auditors as well. Good job on that.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Director Broom, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will we receive a hard copy of the CAFRA? It's a good reference document.
Doug?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. So we wait for the final board approval before we go to print. However, that hopefully will happen the next week, and certainly we will provide that hard copy to each board member. We also provide extra hard copies. We have a lot of external parties that also receive those hard copies, such as credit rating agencies and investors. We do make the CAFRA available once it's approved by the board on the RTD website, and we also follow it with this, file it with the state. So yeah, definitely we will get you a copy.
Thank you.
Are there any other directors who would like to speak? I don't see anyone else. Director Broom, your hand is still up, but thank you. Okay, it's time to take a vote, and in keeping with Director Williams' process, let's first ask if there are any no votes. I do not see any no votes, so the motion carries unanimously 15-0, with Director Tisdale being the mover and Director Broom being the second. Thank you very much. And thank you, Clint Moran, for, we know that the time zone is a little bit different for you, but we really appreciate you coming in. And,
Not a problem. Thank you, Director Catlin.
Okay. Our second recommended action is for the Board of Directors to approve the changes contained in the attached plan documents for the RTD salaried employees defined contribution. Mr. McLeod, do you want to, or no, do I have a motion?
So moved, Director Williams.
Director Williams, is there a second?
Second, Rivera Malpietti.
Okay. So, Mr. McLeod, if you would like to give the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair Catlin. Joining me this evening is Stephen Weinstein. You're all familiar with Stephen, who is the attorney from Spencer Fane that works on the trusts for the salaried employees. We generally refer to our employees that are non-represented as salaried. However, it also includes hourly employees that qualify, full-time employees that qualify for benefits. But our plan happens to be named, our pension plan happens to be named the salaried pension plan. This item tonight we're bringing to the board for approval. The board actually assigns the members of the trusts. So we have 6 trustees on the salaried pension plan, as well as the salaried health and welfare plan. Back in December of 2020, at the Finance Committee, we asked the board for approval to renew terms for existing trustees, as well as appoint new trustees. The board approved those. We have 4 RTD employees serving on the trust as trustees, as well as Directors Catlin and Director Broom. So I wanted to point that out, that to let you know that this item has been through many reviews. Took a lot of work from the trustees to adjust language with Mr. Weinstein's help. Really appreciate his work on this. We've provided a red line copy that shows you the changes, as well as a final copy. The last time this plan it's the DC plan, the defined contribution plan, also referred to as a 401A plan, very similar to a 401K plan in the private sector, in which the employer contributes to that plan based on a percentage of salary. In this case, RTD contributes 7% currently to employees participating in that plan. Qualifying salaried employees are employees that were hired after January 1st, 2008 or thereafter. Employees that are on the salaried side that were hired prior to that time are in the defined benefit or DB plan, which is a pension plan as opposed to a retirement 401A style plan. So what we've provided to the board in your packet is that marked up version. Many of the changes that are in there were to primarily update that plan. It was last updated in 2014. And a lot of it is bringing it up to current standards with some of the newer legislation promulgated for retirement plans, as well as clarifying some issues, all of which are beneficial to the employees participating in that plan. So I will stop there, and Mr. Weinstein and I would be happy to take any questions at this point, Madam Chair.
Mr. Weinstein, did you have anything to add to that about the details? No.
Well, I don't think so, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay. We do have a few directors that have questions. I'll start with Director Broom. Director Broom, do you have
Director Broom failed to take his hand down.
No problem. Director Deschel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Doug and Stephen, or Mr. McLeod and Mr. Weinstein, for your guys' work on this. It's great to see the inclusion of women in our workforce as well as in our compensation plan. I was wondering if you all would be open to adding their or a different gender-neutral pronoun to that list to include those employees who may not identify as male or female, but who may qualify for a salaried plan.
Thank you for your question, Director Deschel. I'll refer that question to Mr. Weinstein with his legal knowledge.
We would have no problem with that. If we could either do it with an additional amendment, if you want to proceed with this, or if you went ahead and approved this subject to us doing that, I see no problem in that.
My only preference is for whatever is most efficient.
I think most efficient is to get this one done. It's been a struggle, but follow up with a simple amendment that could be done just by the trustees of the plan. It wouldn't have to come back to the board, etc.
Well, I'll take you at your word for it, and that works for me.
So to summarize, Director Deschel, you would prefer to see that a simple amendment, if we pass this, it would be subject to the change of pronoun. Is that what you're suggesting?
That is what I am suggesting, yes.
Do other directors have thoughts about this? Director Cook.
I don't have a thought about this. I had another question if you wanted to see if other folks want to weigh in on this particular question.
I do not see any other hands raised, so if you have another item, feel free. Oh, I do see Director Lewis. Was that to Director Deschel's point?
Yes, it is. And I'm happy to provide some language if it's helpful, the pronouns, if that's helpful to you, Mr. Weinstein.
That would be terrific.
Okay, I can send that over to you.
Thank you, Director Lewis. So Director Rivera-Malpiedi, do you want to speak to this point or another?
Yes, just as a point of clarification, I'd like to make sure that our general counsel hones in on this to make sure we're doing this correctly, please.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's appropriate. It would be helpful to get to just poll the board to see if there is general consensus to direct Mr. Weinstein to and authorize the trustees to separately make these adjustments that we're talking about. I think that would be helpful for the record.
Okay, I will do so. guess just in the order that I see you on my list. Director Cook,
That's fine with me if it doesn't impede the timeline too much. It sounds like a good addition.
I think I know Director Lewis. Director Whitmore?
I echo Director Cook's thoughts. Fine with it as long as we don't delay, as Mr. Weinstein had mentioned.
Okay, forgive me if I'm missing anyone, but my Zoom order is a little bit confused.
Pardon me, Madam Chair, just for clarification, you could also just call and ask whether anyone opposes that.
Why don't we do that? Is anyone opposed to the language as suggested by directors Deschel and Lewis? Seeing none, we'll proceed with that, and thank you, Director Lewis, for offering up some suggested language. Director Cook, to your other point.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll ask for a little liberty if you deem it appropriate. It's not a question specifically about the defined contribution plan. In fact, I'm really thinking more about the defined benefit plans. But since the prior presentation had in the CAFR had brought up the unfunded liabilities, do we know, and this is probably for staff, do we know if, are we clear enough now on the guidelines for the stimulus spending to the extent that benefits payments are included in the qualified amounts that the stimulus can be applied toward? And if we are not funding at the full level of actuarial recommendations, could it be an option of ours? Not necessarily that we should, but would it be an option of ours going forward to close that gap sooner using some of the ARPA funds? That's the question I have, if it's okay to ask that in this action item here.
General Manager Johnson, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'll ask Mr. McLeod to opine as well. As I sought clarification in relationship to the Federal Transit Administration as relates to operating costs, considering we're talking about salaries and benefits, I believe this would be permissible as we talk about what we're doing holistically as it rounds out compensation from an employee. Or not from an employee, for an employee. I'm tired. So, thank you.
I understand. Mr. McLeod, do you want to add anything to that?
That is the case, yes, absolutely. And we would need to consider that with the board as well as we go through the budgeting and forecasting process as to how those funds will be applied. General Manager Johnson has referred to in the past the term swapping funds. We do have budgeted money set aside to fund the plan based on the current status. Regarding some of the other plans, such as the ATU plan, that would come through negotiations with the union. But yes, I do believe that that is an opportunity, an option to consider that we will be considering as we go through the budgeting process to apply some of these funds to make up some of that gap. Obviously, there's trade-offs in applying those funds, so that would be part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer your question, Director?
Yes, thanks so much.
Well, and I guess I would like to remind those directors who were on the board previously, there was quite a spirited discussion about the board's contribution to the fund in the past. And so I would suggest that we have that on an agenda for a future meeting during our budgeting process. Are there any other comments before we take a vote on this? I don't see any virtual hands raised. So I'll ask now if there are any votes in opposition of this motion that was moved by Director Williams and seconded by Chair Rivera. I see any objection. Then this motion passes unanimously, 15-0. So, thank you. Moving on. I believe we are moving to other matters. And we do not have any discussion items. So we are moving to other matters. I have one, but I'll let other directors speak before I bring up one other matter. Would anyone like to bring up any other matters? Yeah, I may need some, I'll go ahead, but I may need some help from General Manager Johnson and also possibly Director Davidson, if you would like to chime in. We have a small working group for our internal audit division that is comprised of General Manager CEO Johnson, the board office staff, Director Davidson, myself, and our internal audit manager, Anne Marie. And we have been starting to sort through some of the documents that will be required. And based on the standards, which we are moving toward, there is an internal audit charter. And because we were having trouble with some of the nomenclature, we have elected to call it the Internal Audit Functional Charter. And that is based on the standards. And that will be the document that we'll bring forward to you, by which the other documents will be built. And those documents include our Internal Audit Committee Charter, as well as the cascade effect, which results in a revised charter for the Financial and Administration Committee, because they will be separated out, as well as a change to the board bylaws that results in that committee, those committees being separated. So it's a cascade effect, and there are a number of documents that we will be proceeding with. We were not ready to bring that first internal audit functional charter to you yet, but we will be bringing it to you likely in a special meeting later this month. Did I capture that correctly, CEO Johnson?
Just a point of clarification, most likely as relates to the internal audit function charter, most likely that will be July, as that's the foundation upon which we will build the audit committee charter, recognizing that the recommendations we receive specify that should be a standalone committee. Hence the idea of having it carved out as a special committee. So that's the only thing that's agendized, so we can deal with that business. And so then subsequently, as you stated, Madam Chair, that the other documents remaining would be the modification to the bylaws, due to the fact that everything is referenced as the Finance, Administration, and Audit Committee. And also a point as well as in relationship to recommendations we have received from both the state auditor as well as the APTA peer review, is that the audit committee should not be a committee of the whole, which is something else that I think is important to share in this venue as well as we go forward. So that's what I had to add as related to your comments. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I did forget that we were going to carry that into July. Dr. Davidson, did you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Chair Catlin. No, I really don't. We're making progress here. It does take time, and I think it's important to get it right. So beyond just assuring everybody here that we are making progress on this matter, I have nothing to add, and thank you to CEO Johnson and Chair Catlin for summarizing.
Thank you, Director Davidson. Are there any other matters to come before the committee tonight? I do not see any hands raised at this point. So it is now 7:59 p.m. and I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.